The house smelled faintly of rosemary and lemon polish, the kind of scent that once made guests say, "It feels like home here." But that evening, it carried something heavier, stale silence, and the unspoken truth that home no longer meant the same thing for Kate Whitmore. She sat at the dining table she had polished for decades, in the same Savannah house she'd bought on her own after her husband died. The ceiling fan hummed softly, stirring the warm air. Across from her, her daughter Laura twirled her fork, half listening as Todd scrolled on his phone. The kids laughed over something on the TV in the living room, their voices echoing faintly through the open archway. "Mom," Laura said suddenly, wrinkling her nose, "you really should use that lavender soap I bought you. The house kind of smells old lately." Todd smirked without looking up. "It's not the house, babe." The words landed sharp, then dissolved into laughter. Ethan snickered. Sophie copied him, not even knowing why. Kate froze. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. For a moment, she thought she hadn't heard right, but Laura's chuckle confirmed it. It was a joke. About her. About the woman who had raised her. Paid for this roof. Cooked every meal. Washed every sheet. Kate swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. She forced a small smile. The kind that hid humiliation the way lace curtains hide cracked glass. "I'll try the soap," she said quietly. No one heard her. The conversation had already shifted to Todd's job search, to the kids' new video game, to anything but the woman sitting silently at the head of the table. When dinner ended, Kate began clearing the plates. Laura didn't protest. Todd didn't move. The clatter of dishes was the only sound in the kitchen, followed by the rush of the faucet. Kate's hands trembled slightly under the warm water. She watched the soap bubbles swirl down the drain and thought about how easily things, respect, gratitude, love, can vanish the same way. Later that night, through the thin walls, she heard them talking. Laura's voice was low but sharp. "She's getting forgetful, Todd. It's only a matter of time before she breaks something. And she's always hovering. I need space." Todd sighed. "You're not wrong. But we can't just kick her out. People would talk." "I didn't say kick her out," Laura replied quickly. "Just maybe she could move somewhere smaller. Senior apartments or something. She has money." Todd chuckled. "Trust me. She's not going anywhere unless we make her think it's her idea." Their laughter was faint but cruel. Kate lay in bed, eyes open to the darkness. The ceiling fan spun slowly, slicing through the silence with each turn. Her heart ached, not from shock but recognition. Somewhere deep down, she had known this moment was coming. The small humiliations, the dismissive tone, the way Laura's gratitude had turned into entitlement. It was all leading here. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her pulse. Steady but fragile. In that quiet room filled with old photographs and the scent of fading lilacs, Kate felt the weight of every sacrifice she had made. Every night she'd stayed up, sewing so Laura could have a prom dress. Every bill she'd paid when Todd forgot. Every time she told herself that love meant endurance. But tonight, endurance felt like erasure. A single tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away before it reached her pillow. For the first time in her life, she wasn't crying from pain. She was crying from clarity. If they wanted space, she thought, I'll give them space. More than they ever imagined. Outside, Savannah's cicadas hummed under the moonlight, indifferent witnesses to a quiet revolution beginning in one woman's heart. The morning light that slipped through the lace curtains felt softer than usual, filtered by the faint mist that hung over Savannah. Kate sat by the window with her cup of tea, the house quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock. The steam rose slowly, carrying her backward through time, into the years when everything had begun. She was 23 again, standing in a small sewing shop on Broughton Street, fingers stained with chalk and thread. Back then, her world smelled of fabric softener, and ambition. She wasn't rich, but she was proud, quick with a smile, known for sewing hems, so straight they could shame a machine. That was where she met Tom Whitmore, a carpenter with sawdust on his sleeves and a laugh that filled every corner of the room. They married within a year, not because they had much, but because they had hope. The early days were full of laughter and long hours. She stitched dresses while he built cabinets, saving every spare dollar in a coffee tin marked future home. On weekends, they walked through quiet neighborhoods, dreaming about porches and flower beds. When their daughter Laura was born, Tom carved her a crib by hand, oak wood, smooth and warm to the touch. Kate used to sit beside it at night, humming lullabies, thinking life had finally given her something perfect. But perfection is fragile. When Laura was 5, a construction accident took Tom's life in an instant. Kate remembered the day as if it had been scorched into her memory. The policeman at the door, the hat held against his chest, the sudden stillness that replaced the sound of hammers and laughter. The insurance barely covered the funeral. What remained was debt, grief, and a child who didn't understand why her father never came home. So Kate did what women like her had always done. She worked. She took extra shifts at the sewing shop, then cleaned houses on weekends. At night, she mended uniforms for a local school just to keep the lights on. Her hands cracked from detergent, her back ached, but she never complained. She promised herself that Laura would have everything she didn't: a good education, a safe home, choices. Years passed like seams stitched too tightly, strong but unforgiving. The house she'd once dreamed of with Tom became real, brick by brick. A 2-bedroom home with white shutters and a little porch swing. She paid for it over 20 years, never missing a payment, even when it meant skipping meals. Every nail, every tile, every coat of paint carried a memory of her sacrifice. Laura grew up with new shoes every fall, birthday parties, and a college fund built from her mother's exhaustion. Kate smiled through it all. The dance recitals, the graduations, standing quietly at the edge of photographs, never the one in focus. She'd tell herself she didn't mind. That's what mothers are for, she'd whisper when the loneliness crept in. But now, sitting alone with her tea, those words felt hollow. She realized that she had spent her life not living, but supporting. Every joy had belonged to someone else. Every victory she celebrated had someone else's name on it. Even her laughter had been borrowed from Laura's happiness, from the family she'd built around everyone but herself. Her reflection in the window looked older, smaller than she remembered. "I lived my life in the background," she whispered. The truth lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. She wasn't angry, just awake, and for the first time in decades she felt the faint, trembling stir of something she hadn't dared to feel since Tom died, the possibility of a life that could finally belong to her. The next morning, sunlight spilled gently across the kitchen floor, tracing soft gold lines through the blinds. The house smelled faintly of coffee and toast. Kate moved quietly, setting her teacup down near the sink as Laura rushed around getting the kids ready for school. Todd sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, one shoe off, one on. "I'm heading out for a bit," Kate said calmly, reaching for her purse. Laura glanced up briefly. "Where to?" "To the bank," Kate replied. "I need to take care of a few things." "Okay," Laura said, her voice distracted. "Can you grab milk on the way back? We're out." Kate nodded, forcing a small smile. "Sure." That was it. No curiosity, no concern, not even a goodbye. Todd muttered something about traffic as she walked toward the door. The air outside greeted her like an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. Warm, fragrant with the scent of jasmine and dew on brick. For the first time in a long while, the day belonged entirely to her. She walked slowly down the street, past the iron fences draped in ivy and the sprawling oaks that arched above the sidewalk. Spanish moss hung like soft gray veils, swaying gently in the morning breeze. The world felt impossibly calm, as if Savannah itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. The fear came first, a whisper in her chest, quiet but persistent. What if this was a mistake? What if Laura found out and grew angry? What if she was too old to start over? Her hand tightened around the strap of her purse as she walked past Forsyth Park. Joggers passed her, dogs tugged at their leashes, and a group of women in yoga clothes laughed near the fountain. They all looked so certain of where they were headed, so effortlessly alive. Kate realized she hadn't felt that kind of freedom in decades. Her days had been a cycle of servitude, cleaning, cooking, adjusting herself to fit inside someone else's comfort. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that she, too, had once dreamed of small, beautiful things, reading in the park, traveling to the coast, sewing dresses for pleasure instead of necessity. She had silenced those desires for so long that she almost didn't recognize them now. She stopped at a crosswalk, watching the light turn from red to green. The click of the signal echoed softly against the cobblestone street. For a brief moment she hesitated. Her old self, the one who always asked permission, who apologized for existing, wanted to turn back. But the new voice inside her, quiet yet firm, whispered something different. Keep walking. And she did. Each step felt like a rebellion. She noticed the way the sunlight filtered through the moss above, dappling the ground in moving shadows. A young couple strolled past, holding hands, sharing a pastry wrapped in paper. A little boy tossed breadcrumbs to pigeons near the park benches. The ordinary beauty of it all tugged at something deep inside her, the realization that the world was still wide, still kind, still waiting. By the time she reached the corner where the small brick bank stood, her fear had softened into something steadier. Resolve. She adjusted her scarf, took a deep breath, and climbed the steps. Inside, the air was cool, filled with the faint hum of printers and the scent of polished wood. She felt her pulse quicken, not from panic, but from purpose. Today wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming control over her life, inch by inch, decision by decision. As the glass door closed behind her with a gentle click, Kate realized that this simple errand, this quiet morning walk to the bank, was the first real act of freedom she'd taken in more than 40 years. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the worry and the tremor of fear, a spark caught fire and refused to go out. The bank was cool and quiet, a world away from the noise of home. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, glinting off marble floors and the brass edges of teller counters. Kate paused near the entrance, steadying herself. For a moment, she felt like an intruder, just another old woman with a handbag full of folded receipts and memories. But then she lifted her chin. Today, she wasn't here to withdraw or deposit. She was here to take back control of her life. At the far end of the lobby, a man stood up from his desk. "Mrs. Whitmore," he greeted warmly. "Robert Price. Please have a seat." He was in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of calm presence that made people trust him instantly. Kate had seen him a few times before, usually when Laura came along to help her with her finances. But this time, Kate was alone. Robert smiled, but his expression softened when he noticed her trembling hands. "How can I help you today?" Kate took a deep breath. "Mr. Price," she began carefully, "I think it's time I made a few changes. My daughter and her husband have had access to my accounts for years. I'd like to end that." He nodded slowly, setting down his pen. "I understand. Would you like to tell me what's been happening?" The words came hesitantly at first, then faster as she spoke. She told him about the bills that mysteriously appeared in her account summary, the debit card Laura used freely, the automatic payments Todd had set up for convenience. She confessed how she'd become afraid to check her own statements because it always reminded her of how invisible she'd become in her own life. When she finished, Robert leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently, "what you're describing is financial abuse. It happens more often than people think, especially to older clients who trust their family. But you're doing the right thing by addressing it." Kate blinked. Abuse. She'd never called it that before, but the word fit. It made everything sharper, clearer. Robert slid a form toward her. "We'll start by revoking all joint access and closing any linked cards. After that, we'll transfer your funds into a new account, one that only you can manage. I'll make sure there are safeguards in place, fraud alerts, limited withdrawal permissions, and we can set up a secondary verification if anyone ever tries to act on your behalf." She watched as he typed, the rhythmic clicks of the keyboard steady and reassuring. Each sound felt like a small victory. When he handed her the new account forms, she signed her name, slowly, savoring the curve of each letter. Her signature looked different now, firmer, more deliberate. Robert smiled approvingly. "We'll also move a portion of your savings into a separate bank, just to diversify your protection. Think of it as a financial backup. That way, if anyone pressures you, they'll never know where your primary funds are." Kate exhaled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Thank you," she said softly. "You don't know what this means to me." "I think I do," he replied. "You're taking back your independence. That's something to be proud of." They spent another half-hour reviewing documents and setting up notifications. Before she left, Robert handed her a small folder with her new account information and a printed brochure titled "Protecting Your Finances as You Age." As she stepped outside, the Savannah sun was brighter, the air warmer. The city sounds felt different too, less like noise, more like life itself returning. The fear that had lived in her chest for so long had quieted, replaced by something steadier, stronger. On the sidewalk, she stopped for a moment, closing her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt ownership, not just over her money, but over her choices, her time, her peace. The wind brushed against her cheek as if congratulating her. She smiled faintly, clutching the folder to her chest. The woman who had entered the bank that morning had been timid, unsure, afraid to disturb the order of things. The one walking out now was something else entirely, still soft-spoken, still gentle, but unshakably firm inside. A woman reborn. The law office sat in a quiet brick building off Bull Street, framed by magnolia trees and white columns. Inside, it smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish, like history itself had taken root there. Kate had walked through these doors before, always with Laura beside her, letting her daughter handle the conversations while she nodded politely. But today she came alone. Arthur Bennett looked up from behind his mahogany desk as she entered. He was a tall man in his late 60s with kind eyes and a voice that carried a quiet authority. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said warmly, standing to shake her hand. "It's been a while. What brings you in today?" Kate sat down, smoothing the edge of her handbag. "I need to make some changes," she said carefully. "Legal ones." Arthur raised an eyebrow, sensing the weight in her tone. "All right," he said, folding his hands. "Let's talk about what kind of changes you have in mind." She hesitated for only a moment before speaking. "I want to revoke my old will, the one naming my daughter and her husband as beneficiaries." He nodded slowly. "Understood. Do you wish to draft a new one?" "Yes," she said firmly, "but not today. I'm not ready to decide yet where everything should go. For now, I just want to make sure the old one no longer stands." Arthur leaned back, his expression thoughtful but approving. "We can absolutely do that. You have every right to revoke it. I'll prepare a statement for your signature today." Kate felt a strange surge of relief. For years, she believed her life was a closed book, every decision made long ago, every line already written. But now, with a few strokes of a pen, she was erasing the parts where she'd been invisible. Arthur began pulling out forms and folders, explaining each step with patient precision. "While we're at it," he continued, "you may want to update your power of attorney as well. Right now, your daughter has authority to make financial and medical decisions if you're incapacitated." Kate frowned. "I'd like to change that. For both." He nodded. "We can assign those powers to a neutral executor, someone of your choosing. Or, if you prefer, we can leave them inactive until you appoint someone later." "Do that," she said quietly. "No one else should sign for me ever again." Arthur smiled faintly. "That's a wise decision." As he filled out the forms, the sound of the pen scratching across paper filled the room like the ticking of a clock. Steady, deliberate, final. He walked her through the legalities. How a revoked will require witnesses, how a living will could protect her medical choices, how property deeds could be reaffirmed under her sole ownership. Each explanation made her sit a little straighter. They reviewed the deed to her house, the home she had bought brick by brick. Arthur confirmed what she already knew. It was entirely hers, no co-signers, no claims. But hearing it aloud gave her an odd sense of vindication. "You've done well, Mrs. Whitmore," Arthur said. "Most people don't realize how important it is to protect themselves before someone else makes choices for them." She smiled, though her eyes glistened. "I used to think love meant letting others make decisions for you. Now I see it means trusting yourself to make them." When everything was signed, Arthur handed her a manila envelope. It was heavier than it looked. Inside were the revocation papers, her new medical directive, and the temporary power of attorney suspension. She held it like a key to her own freedom. As she stood to leave, Arthur said softly, "If you ever need a witness or executor when you're ready to write your new will, you can count on me." "Thank you," she replied, her voice steadier than it had been all morning. Stepping outside, the afternoon sun bathed the street in amber light. The papers rustled softly in her purse as she walked toward the bus stop. Each page was a small victory, a declaration that her life was still hers to define. She paused at the corner, watching the moss-draped oaks sway in the warm breeze. For the first time, she understood something simple yet profound. Independence wasn't just about leaving, it was about reclaiming. And today, with every signature and every notarized line, Kate Whitmore had begun to reclaim herself, one document at a time. The house was quiet that night, the kind of silence that made every small sound feel enormous. The clock in the hallway ticked with slow precision, each second echoing against the walls that had once held laughter and love. Moonlight streamed through the living room window, painting long silver lines across the floor. Kate moved carefully, her footsteps muffled against the old rug. She had been planning this moment for days, each step deliberate, each choice final. She opened her closet and ran her fingers across the hanging clothes. Some still smelled faintly of lavender detergent, others of thyme and dust. She didn't need most of them. Not anymore. She folded 2 cardigans, a few blouses, a pair of jeans, and one good dress, the navy one she'd worn to Laura's graduation all those years ago. She hesitated before placing it in the suitcase. That dress had once represented pride and belonging. Now, it was a reminder of everything she'd given up to keep a family from falling apart. Her hands found a small tin box on the top shelf, the one where she kept old photos. The edges were frayed, the colors fading, but the memories burned clear. There was Tom, smiling on their porch, sawdust in his hair. There was Laura as a baby, her tiny hand gripping Kate's finger. And there was one photo, Kate herself younger, sitting at her sewing table, smiling as sunlight streamed through the window. The joy on her face wasn't for anyone else. It was hers. She traced the corner of that photo, then slid it into her purse. It would be the only one she took. The rest she left where they were, neatly stacked. She wanted no trace of resentment, no chaos, only peace. At the kitchen table, she unfolded a sheet of stationery, cream paper, her name embossed at the top. Her pen hovered for a moment before she began to write. Laura, I am not leaving because I stopped loving you. I am leaving because I finally love myself. For many years, this house was my whole world. Every meal, every laugh, every argument, it was all I had left after your father died. I built this home from the scraps of my own exhaustion because I wanted you to have stability even when I didn't. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being seen as a person. I became part of the furniture, useful until I wasn't. And that's not your fault entirely, it's mine too. I taught you that I would always stay, no matter how it made me feel. Please don't look for me. I am safe. I have my own plans, and they no longer include waiting for someone to understand my worth. Take care of the children. Teach them kindness, not convenience. And when you think of me, I hope it's not with guilt, but with understanding. Mom, she set the pen down and let the ink dry. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the words, feeling their weight settle over her like a soft blanket. There was no anger in the letter, only truth and a strange, quiet mercy. By the time the clock struck midnight, the suitcase was zipped, the letter placed neatly on the kitchen counter beneath the small porcelain figurine Laura had bought her years ago. Kate stood in the doorway for a long moment, her eyes sweeping over the house, the family photos, the worn couch, the faint glow of the night light in the hallway. Her heart ached, but it wasn't the kind of pain that broke. It was the kind that mended. When she finally stepped outside, the air was cool and fragrant with magnolia. Crickets sang softly in the distance. She closed the door gently behind her, locking it for the last time. Then she lifted her suitcase, squared her shoulders, and walked down the path toward the quiet street. Behind her was a house full of memories. Ahead of her was something entirely new. Freedom wrapped in uncertainty, but freedom nonetheless. And as she disappeared into the silver light of dawn, Kate Whitmore smiled through her tears, whispering to herself at last, I'm coming home. The first light of dawn crept gently across the savannah skyline, washing the quiet streets in soft shades of rose and gold. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of salt from the river. Spanish moss swayed lazily in the morning breeze as Kate wheeled her small suitcase down the front steps, the sound of its wheels whispering against the brick path. The neighborhood was still asleep. Only the birds had begun to stir, their songs delicate and cautious, as if they too understood the sacredness of this hour. Kate paused at the end of the walkway, her hand resting on the latch of the old white gate. The house behind her stood still, windows dark, unaware that its keeper was leaving for good. For a brief moment, her heart hesitated, the way it had done every morning for 40 years when she thought of Laura, of Tom, of all the yesterdays stored within those walls. But this time there was no turning back. You've done enough looking back, she murmured to herself. Then, quietly, she opened the gate and stepped onto the sidewalk. The taxi she'd arranged the night before was waiting at the corner, its engine idling softly. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, offered to help with the bag. Kate shook her head gently. I've got it, she said, sliding into the back seat. As the car rolled down the tree-lined street, she glanced at the mirror once, just to see the last trace of her home fade into the distance. Then she turned her gaze forward, toward the rising sun. She didn't look back again. Inside the house, an hour later, the world stirred to life. Laura's alarm went off, the shrill tone cutting through the stillness. She shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, expecting to find her mother already brewing tea as always. Instead, she found the empty teacup in the sink, a folded letter on the counter, and silence, thick, unfamiliar silence. Mom, she called. No answer. Todd entered moments later, yawning. She probably went for her walk. Laura frowned. At sunrise? Without her phone. But something in her voice faltered as she saw the envelope with her name. She picked it up slowly, recognizing the familiar handwriting, the elegant loops, the steady hand. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. While she read, Todd opened his laptop at the table, muttering about bills that needed paying. He logged into the joint account, except the password didn't work. He tried again, and again. Error. Access denied. A message flashed across the screen. This account has been closed. Please contact your local branch for assistance. What the hell? Todd's voice rose, panic creeping in. Laura didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the letter, her breath shallow. By the time she reached the final line, I am not leaving because I stopped loving you. I am leaving because I finally love myself. Her expression had shifted from disbelief to something quieter, almost fragile. She sank into a chair, staring at the empty spot across the table where her mother used to sit. The morning sun was pouring through the window now, lighting the room in gold, the same light that had followed Kate as she left. For the first time, the house felt enormous. Every sound echoed, the tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustle of the letter in Laura's trembling hands. Out there, somewhere beyond the city's waking rhythm, Kate Whitmore was already on the highway, the dawn reflected in her eyes. She didn't feel triumphant, just free. The world had finally grown wide again, and as the taxi carried her toward whatever came next, she whispered softly, not to anyone in particular, let them wake to silence. That's where power begins. The apartment was small, tucked above a row of old brick storefronts that faced a quiet park. When Kate first unlocked the door, the scent of fresh paint and pine cleaner filled the air, a scent that meant beginning. Sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, landing softly on the worn wooden floor. There was just enough space for what she'd brought: one suitcase, a few clothes, her sewing kit, and a framed photograph of her younger self smiling in the light. For the first time in decades, every item in the room belonged solely to her. Her first morning there, she woke before sunrise out of habit, expecting the muffled sound of footsteps and slammed doors. But there was only stillness. She sat up, listening to it, the quiet no longer lonely but new. After a moment, she smiled and slipped on her sweater. Downstairs, the scent of baked bread drifted from the cafe below, and the sound of a radio played softly through the open window. She made herself a cup of tea and carried it to the small balcony. The view wasn't grand, just the tops of magnolia trees and the curve of the walking path through the park, but it was hers. She watched joggers go by, an older man feeding pigeons, children on bicycles wobbling past their parents. Life continued, not around her this time, but with her. By mid-morning, she took a slow walk through the park. The air smelled of wet grass and camellias. Couples sat on benches with takeaway coffee, their voices mingling with the hum of cicadas. Kate breathed deeply, feeling the heaviness in her chest begin to loosen. Each step felt lighter. That afternoon, as she unpacked her things, she heard a knock at the door. Standing outside was a woman about her age, holding a basket of oranges. "You must be the new tenant," she said, smiling warmly. "Doris Lane. Your cousin, though we haven't seen each other since." "Oh, mercy, your wedding." Kate blinked in surprise. Doris lived only a few streets away, and word of her move had clearly traveled fast. "Doris," she said, a small laugh escaping her. "It's been a lifetime." They talked for hours over tea, trading memories of childhood summers in Tybee Island, of family picnics and lost recipes. When Doris finally left, she squeezed Kate's hand. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly. "Sometimes we get a second chance at living right where we thought life had ended." That evening, Kate cooked dinner just for herself, nothing fancy, just chicken with rosemary and lemon, the way Tom used to like it. She set the table for one, lit a candle, and sat by the window as dusk settled over the park. For years, she had cooked without ever tasting, always saving the best pieces for someone else. but tonight, every bite was hers. Over the next few weeks, she built a rhythm that felt both strange and comforting. Morning walks became ritual. She joined a small knitting circle at the church on Fridays, where the women welcomed her with gentle curiosity and easy laughter. On Sundays, she attended service not out of duty, but for peace, the music, the stillness, the soft glow of stained glass across her hands. Sometimes in the afternoons, she sat on a park bench with a book, letting the sun warm her face. People passed and smiled. Children played. She began to recognize faces, neighbors, shopkeepers, the woman who sold flowers near the corner. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as someone's mother, but simply as Kate. One morning, Doris joined her for a walk. They moved slowly beneath the moss-draped oaks, their footsteps blending with the rhythm of the city waking around them. Doris linked her arm through Kate's. "You seem lighter," she said. Kate smiled, watching the sunlight spill through the trees. "I think I finally am." As they reached the edge of the park, the church bells began to chime in the distance, soft, steady, and full of promise. The sound drifted through the air like a blessing. For the first time in a long while, Kate Whitmore didn't feel like she was starting over. She felt like she was finally starting. The weeks turned into months, and the house on Whitmore Street began to lose its old rhythm. Without Kate's steady hands and quiet diligence, Laura quickly discovered how much she had taken for granted. The laundry piled up. Meals became rushed, thrown together after work. The children complained about takeout and missed their grandmother's cooking. Todd grumbled about bills, about how things used to run smoother, but deep down, even he knew the truth. They had relied on Kate not just for chores, but for balance. When the next mortgage payment came due, Laura sat at the kitchen table staring at the bank notice. The account was thinner than she'd realized. Her mother's contribution, the quiet transfers she'd made every month to help with groceries and school, was gone. She hadn't even noticed it until it stopped. The absence felt like a mirror. Todd took on extra shifts at the hardware store, while Laura picked up freelance accounting work from home. The children, sensing the change, began helping without being asked. Ethan mowed lawns for neighbors. Sophie packed her own lunches. The house that had once felt full now seemed smaller, quieter, every sound echoing against the memory of the woman who'd held it all together. One Saturday morning, Laura walked through the farmers' market downtown. The air smelled of peaches and roasted pecans. She wasn't sure what drew her there, habit, maybe, or something deeper. She moved past the stands of wildflowers and honey jars, lost in thought, until a familiar voice made her stop. "Laura." She turned. There, standing behind a display of hand-sewn table linens, was her mother. Kate looked different, lighter somehow, her hair neatly pinned, her eyes clear. She wore a pale blue blouse and a quiet smile that didn't carry the exhaustion Laura remembered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the market filled the space between them. Laughter, the chatter of vendors, the sound of a violin somewhere nearby. "You look well," Laura said finally, her voice soft. "I am," Kate replied. "And you?" Laura hesitated, then smiled faintly. "We're managing. It's been a learning curve." Kate nodded. "That's good. Learning's what makes us grow." Laura picked up one of the linens, tracing the stitching with her fingers. "Did you make these?" Kate nodded again. "Old habits die hard. Doris sells them here every weekend, so I started helping her." "They're beautiful," Laura said quietly. She looked up, meeting her mother's eyes. "Mom, But Kate stopped her gently with a hand on her arm. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "We all learn the hard way sometimes." Laura's throat tightened. There were 1,000 things she wanted to say, apologies, regrets, memories, but none of them seemed right. So instead, she said the only truth that mattered. "I miss you." Kate's expression softened. I know, she said. I miss you too. But I think we both needed space to understand what love really looks like. For a long moment, they stood there amid the hum of the market, two women bound by love that had finally learned to breathe. There was no anger left, no bitterness, just quiet understanding. Laura reached for her purse. Can I buy one of these? Kate smiled. You can take it. On the house. Laura shook her head gently. No, I'd like to pay for it this time. The exchange was simple. A few bills passed from one hand to another, but in that gesture lived the beginning of respect, the kind that can't be demanded, only earned. As Laura walked away, she turned once, just to see her mother laughing with another customer, sunlight glinting off her silver hair. For the first time, she didn't feel guilt. She felt pride. Back at home, Laura folded the linen across the dining table. Todd came in with dirt on his hands, tired but smiling from work. The kids were reading quietly in the living room. The house was still imperfect, still noisy, but it was theirs now, truly theirs. Somewhere across town, in her small apartment by the park, Kate sat on her balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip low behind the magnolias. The city lights flickered to life one by one. She felt no need to call, no ache of longing. What she had wanted for so long, for her family to grow, to stand on their own, was finally happening. Her heart swelled with something gentle and steady, peace. It wasn't the reunion of fairy tales or the redemption of regret. It was quieter than that. Two lives untangled, but still connected by something unspoken and enduring. As the church bells began to ring in the distance, Kate smiled to herself and whispered, "They'll be all right now." And in the stillness that followed, she realized she was two. A full year had passed since the morning Kate walked away from her old life, and the rhythm of her days had softened into something she never thought she'd know again: peace. Her apartment near the park had become a sanctuary of quiet contentment. The walls were filled not with photographs of the past, but with sunlight and the scent of lavender from the small pots lining her balcony. Every morning began the same way. Tea steaming gently beside her window, the rustle of pages from a book she no longer needed to rush through, and the sound of life moving outside, a reminder that the world was wide and waiting. She had learned the small rituals of freedom, walking to the market on Saturdays, tending to the herbs on her windowsill, laughing with Doris over church potlucks and knitting mistakes. The city around her seemed slower now, or maybe she had finally learned how to move at its pace. She found joy in simplicity, the morning dew on magnolia leaves, the warmth of a good meal cooked for no one but herself. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was solitude, and it suited her. Her health had improved too. Her doctor said her blood pressure was down, her energy better. "You seem lighter," he told her during her last visit. Kate had smiled and replied, "I finally put down the things that weren't mine to carry." That afternoon, she stopped by the post office on her way home. There was a single envelope waiting for her, addressed in neat handwriting she didn't recognize at first. It was from Ethan, her grandson. The sight of his name made her heart catch. She hadn't expected to hear from him. The distance she'd chosen had been clean, deliberate. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she tore the envelope open. Inside was a letter written in careful cursive, the ink slightly smudged in places. "Dear Grandma, Mom told us why you left. She said it wasn't about us, but about you needing to live for yourself. I didn't really understand what that meant at first. I was mad, to be honest. I thought you didn't love us anymore. But then things got hard. I started mowing lawns after school to help Dad. And one day, while folding laundry, I remembered how you used to hum while doing the same thing. You never complained. You just worked quietly. That's when I realized you weren't weak for staying all those years. You were strong for holding us together. I miss you, Grandma. I miss your biscuits and the way your hands smelled like soap and cinnamon. Mom's getting better, She talks about you differently now. I think she finally understands too. I hope you're happy. I hope you're living the way you always deserved. Love. Ethan. Kate pressed a trembling hand to her lips. The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes, not the bitter kind that stung with regret, but the soft, healing kind that came with gratitude. She read the letter again, slower this time, tracing the loops of his handwriting as if each curve were a heartbeat. She sat back in her chair and looked out the window. The afternoon sun was golden, spilling across the park in dappled light. A group of children were flying kites, their laughter carried by the wind. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to chime, slow, tender, familiar. Kate folded the letter carefully and placed it in her drawer beside her favorite teacup and the one photograph she'd taken with her, the younger version of herself, smiling at the sewing table, full of quiet purpose. That woman had once been buried beneath years of duty and silence. Now she was free again, living in the body and heart of someone older, wiser, but finally whole. Later that evening, Doris stopped by with a pie and news from the church group. They sat on the balcony, talking about small things, recipes, whether a new book club forming at the library. As the sky deepened into pink and violet, Doris looked over and said, "You've changed, Kate. You seem peaceful." Kate smiled, her eyes glistening. "I think peace was always there," she said softly. "I just had to make room for it." When Doris left, the apartment fell silent again, but it was the kind of silence that felt alive. Kate poured herself a final cup of tea and sat by the window, the letter from Ethan resting beside her. The world outside shimmered beneath the glow of streetlights. Somewhere in the distance, laughter rose and faded into the night. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of everything she had released and the fullness of everything she had gained. For the first time in her long life, she didn't define herself by what she'd given or lost, but by what she'd reclaimed, her dignity, her choices, her peace. And as the stars began to appear above Savannah, their light soft against the velvet sky, she smiled through quiet tears and whispered to the empty room, not with sadness, but with pride. She hadn't lost a daughter. She had finally found herself.